We're learning the first Sikha on Chamishasa Ba'av in Chelek Chav Daled on page 47. This Sikha is a hadron on Masechta Tainis, which speaks about the day of Chamishasa Ba'av. One of the many hadronim of the Rebbe on the Masechta. You have another one here in this Krach. You have one we learned already in Chelek Yutes. So here, this is a hadron on the Masechta that will focus on one of the details, and the Rebbe has a beautiful pshat in the Gemara here, and explaining that detail, and B'chlal, the whole inyan of the Yom Tov of Chamishasa B'av. The shir today is being learned, Lila Nishmas, Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin, ben Rab Menashe Koltman. Like then was the Mishnah sagt, Lehoy Yom Tovim li Yisrael k'Chamishasa B'av v'chayom HaKippurim. So the Mishnah says that there are no Yom Tovim for Yidden that compares to the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. Bringt die Gemara kamet Taimim von Amirayim of dem Yom Tov von Tezvav B'av. So the Gemara brings a few reasons that Amirayim said regarding what is so great about the Yom Tov of the 15th of Av. The first reason the Gemara says is Yom Shehutru Shvatim Lovei Zeh B'zeh. This is the day that the Shvatim were allowed to marry one another. As we'll see later in the Sikha in detail, in Chumash, in the end of Chumash Bamidbar, it says that those women of a Shevet that had no brothers and they inherited from their father his properties, they're not allowed to marry into a different Shevet, because then what ends up happening is the properties they inherited gets inherited either by their children or by their husband, which is from another Shevet. So you cause this property that belonged to one Shevet to now go over to another. So they're not allowed to marry into another Shevet. Now this Isser was the first generation when they came into Eretz Yisrael, but then the next generation on Chamishasa B'av, the Chachamim darshaned and said that anyone could marry whichever Shevet they wish, and they took off this limitation. So that's the first reason of why this is such a great Yom Tov. The next reason, Yom Shekolu by Meisei Midbar. On this day, the Meisei Midbar, from the time of the Chet of the Meraglim, so every year on Tisha B'av, the Yidden would dig their own grave, and the generation of the Midbar slowly passed away throughout those following 39 years until the generation all passed away, and then they came into Eretz Yisrael. Now, the last year, they dug a grave and they didn't know if this was the last year or not. And then Chamishasa B'av, they saw the moon is full. They understood that they're not going to pass away this year. So this is the day that this generation that passed away stopped. The third reason, Yom Shebitl Hosheya ben Ela Prusti Yosh Shehoshev Yeravam ben Nevat Al Adrachim Shlo Yali Yisrael Erega. So Yeravam ben Nevat, which was the first king that was from Malchi Yisrael. There was the Malchi Beis David, which began with David HaMelech and Shloimeh, and then Rechavam, the son of Shloimeh. But then the kingdom got split when Yeravam ben Nevat established his own kingdom, and most of the Shvatim of the Yidden followed him. And he did not want the Yidden to follow the kingdom that came from Beis David, so he created for himself his own place where the Yidden should be Oile Regel, and they served the Avodah Zarah there. And he placed officers along the way to not allow Yidden to be Oile Regel, until Hosheya ben Ela came, and on this day of Chamishasa B'av removed those officers that didn't allow Yidden to be Oile Regel. The fourth reason, Yom Shenitna Aruge Beita Lekvura. On this day, all the Yidden, many millions of Yidden that were killed in the city of Beitar, which was conquered and destroyed, and all Yidden were annihilated in the city. This was at the time of the Churban of the second Beis HaMikdash. So the Yidden were left there unburied. They didn't allow Yidden to be buried, and a miracle occurred that the bodies did not decay, and they were able to later bring them to be buried, and it happened on this day of Chamishasa B'av. the Gemara. Finally, the Gemara brings a fifth reason. Rabbi ben Rabbi Yosef, Damri Tarvayu, Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef both said, Yom Shepasku Milichres Eitzim Lemaracha. This is the day that they stopped cutting the wood that was cut and prepared for the maracha, for the fire on the Mizbeach. As the Gemara describes in Tainis Barichis, the various different families that would cut wood for the eitzim, that's needed for the karbanos on the mizbeach. But it's on this day, Chamishasa B'av, where the heat of the summer is getting a little less, and therefore the wood is not anymore going to be fit for the mizbeach. So this is the day when they stopped cutting wood for the mizbeach. And the Gemara explains this with what it says in the Braisa. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Godloime, Chamishasa B'av ve'elech, from the 15th and of going forward, Tashash Keicha Shulchama. So the heat of the sun gets less. And therefore, they didn't cut the wood for the fire on the Mizbeach, because the wood is not dry enough, and therefore it's possible that worms should get into the wood, the moisture of the wood, and therefore it can't be brought on the Mizbeach. Rav Menashe, in connection with this, Rav Menashe said, Yom Taver Magol. And they referred to this day, the 15th of Av, the day of the breaking of the axe. Because they didn't have to cut any more the wood, so this is the day that they broke the axe. Now, but the Aleph, all of the reasons that the Gemara here gives is verstandig, it's understood, for was der Tag is angenommen geworden als a Yom Tov. Why this day is a day, a Yom Tov, a celebration. Weil es hat sich dann aufgetan an Inyan Tov v'Tayelis for Yidden. Because it's a day that something good and beneficial occurred for Yidden. Der Bittel v'Hefsik von Agzede v'Einish. Whether we could say that this is a day that there's a certain decree or punishment stopped, and that's the reason that it says Yom Shekolawei Meisei Midbar. The Meisei Midbar did not die anymore. Yom Shebitul Sheya Shalayal Yisrael Regel, the day that Yidden were able to be Al Regel once again, or Yom Shnitna Ruge Beitel Kavura, the unburied dead Yidden of the city Beitar were able to be buried. So this is all removing something negative on this day. Oder Amelia Chesarin, or something that was lacking was not lacking anymore. It was all filled. In other words, they were able to do something which was a certain limitation before. And that's the reasons it brings in the beginning. Yom Shehutra Shvatim Lavi Zeh B'Zeh, the day that the Shvatim could all in to marry with one another. And Yom Shehutra Shevet Bin Yom Lavi B'Kol. Whoops, it looks like I missed this before when we read it in the Gemara. So let me just explain what this means. Yom Shehuta Shevet B'Yam Lavi B'Kol is a very terrible story that's described in Nach, in the end of Shoftim, about a story with Pelegish Begiva, without getting into all the details. After what was done through someone from Shevet Binyamin, Klal Yisrael made a decree that no woman should marry any man from Shevet Binyamin. But then, after a certain point of time, the Chachamim came and said that that was only made for that first generation, and it was in Chamisha Asa B'Av that they were matter that they should be able to marry back into Shevet Binyamin. So this is also taking off a certain limitation that was there before. So it's understood why there's a reason to celebrate on this day. However, here regarding this last reason, the Gemara says, the day that they stopped cutting the wood for the fire on the Mizbeach, darf man verstehen. So there's an obvious question here. Was for a Meile, Muyechedes, V'toiv, is da in einem Hefsik von einem greaten Eitzem Lamaracha. What advantage, what good is there about the fact that this is a day that they stopped cutting the wood for the fire on the Mizbeach? Was zu lieb dem, soll der Tag sein a Yom Tov, and therefore this day is a Yom Tov, a celebration. Und dazu noch a Yom Tov Gadol, was lehoi Yom Tovim ketezvav ba v'chayem kippurim. And such a great celebration that this, for this reason alone, as all other reasons, each one stands alone, that this would be such a great Yom Tov that there's no other Yom Tov as great as this, Yom Kippur. Man hat dem Tag aufgehört an Inyan l'tzeirach HaMikdash, so wird das a Yom Tov? Because they stopped preparing something for the Beis HaMikdash, so that's the reason why it should be a day of celebration, a day of a Yom Tov. Und Rav Menashe is noch meisiv, and Rav Menashe adds another point here, as their hefsik krisis eitzim l'maracha. The day that they stopped cutting the wood here for the Mizbeach is Azah Inyan Naila. It's such a great thing, because Nikra B'Shem, they gave it a special name, Meruf Dem Tog, B'Tashem Miyuchad, Yom Taver Magol, has a unique and special name. This is the day of the breaking of the axe. What's so good and special about the fact that it's the day of the breaking of the axe? The Tmi is noch stark, the questioner is even stronger. Rabbi Eliezer Gadol explains why did they stop cutting wood for the Mizbeach on this day, is because the heat of the sun is not as strong anymore. This means that there is a certain weakening and lacking in a power and nature, was bringt atayeles und is hahechrech they haben zurückneitzen lamaracha. This power of the sun that gives the heat to dry up the wood, that makes it possible to use the wood for the fire on the Mizbeach. So on this day, that power of nature has weakened, and now you won't have the proper wood available anymore. So it's basically a day where there's a certain positive power of nature that's being weakened on this day. Und von dem was der Tam. Yom Shepasku Melichris Eitzim. is Adas Rabbim. Now, an additional point here from the fact that this reason that they stopped cutting the wood on this day is not just the opinion of one Amayra, but this is a few together that are saying this. Rabbi, Rav Yosef, Rav Menashe, all three. Nid with the time of Neze was yet the time is Adas Yachid. Unlike the previous reasons the Gemara brings, that each one of them is just one Amayra saying so. Is mashma, so it seems, as at a time ikri of their simcha v'yamtiv v'chamishasabav, that this is a very main reason for the joy and the yamtiv of this day, the 15th of Av. Akopanim mer from the andere time. At least we can say it's more important than the other reasons quoted. Chach as kol hanach amiroi loy pligi. Even though, as the Rashbam says, all these Amiroim that are giving these reasons are not arguing with one another. Each one heard from his teacher one reason, and it's all true. But nevertheless, this reason that a few Amiroim are saying must be amongst the reasons a more important reason. How could it be so? It seems like that it's no reason to celebrate at all. So here in Siv Beis, the Rebbe brings what it says in the Rishayim about this. The Rishayim addressed this question. Rabbeinu Gershom bepirusha sagt, Rabbeinu Gershom in his Pirush on the Gemara here says, as the chshivas von Yom Shapasku melichres eitzim lamaracha. What's so great about this day that they stopped cutting the wood for the mizbeach is vile. It's because lefisha shayu asukim lichres eitzim atzei amaracha. In this time period when they were busy cutting the wood for the mizbeach, hayu mizbatle metalmid Torah. They didn't have the same time to learn Torah. Aval oisa Yom Pasku. On that day, they stopped from this work, Vasu Yomtiv, and now they established it for a Yomtiv. Shemikam v'heile chayoiskim b'teira. That from here going forward, they could use this time to learn. Vaslafid dvarav. Now, so according to what Rabbeinu Gershom says, is muzber der iloi for them yom shapaskum elichris eitzim lamaracha. It explains what's special about this day that they stopped cutting the wood for the mizbeach. But Tzlibdem Asu Yamtiv, and which therefore it's a Yamtiv. Basically, they're celebrating the fact that they now have an added opportunity to learn Torah. The Rashbam bezagt, however, the Rashbam argues and gives a different reason. V'oisa Yom Shapasku, the day that they stopped cutting the wood, Hayu Smeichen, there was a big joy. Lefisha ba'oisa Yom Hayu Mashlimin Mitzvah Gedayle Kezais, because it's on this day that they completed such a great mitzvah. As the Maila, the Simcha, from Hefse Krisis Eitzim, the big advantage and the Simcha of this day of stopping to cut the wood is verbunden damit, was not mashvelen gewende mitzvah. It's connected to the fact that they completed a mitzvah. Kishem, wie mir gefindt, der Inyan Simcha bei der Shlama v'Gmar von anderen mitzvahs. As we find this idea that when you complete a mitzvah, or you complete the whole Torah, you complete a Masechta, that's a cause and a reason for joy. And that's the main point over here. That they finished this mitzvah for the year to complete the cutting of the wood that they need for the Mizbeach. Now the Rebbe explains, we have here the Rabbeinu Gershom and the Rashbam. Why did the Rashbam not accept Rabbeinu Gershom's pshat? Uns ist verstandig, for was der Rashbam will not learn wie Rabbeinu Gershom. Why the Rashbam did not accept Rabbeinu Gershom's pshat? Weil lefi das Rabbeinu Gershom, because according to Rabbeinu Gershom we have the following questions. Aleph, ha'ikka chassid b'gemara. The main point here is missing in the words of the Gemara. The Maila, was mekam ve'ele chayoiskim b'Torah, this, that they now had more time to learn Torah, vert nit demonten divrei Rabbi v'chulu. It's not mentioned at all in the words of Rabbi or anything else that the Gemara says in connection to this. Now, and thus, as the Gemara is mamshech, this, that it does say after this in the Gemara, mekam ve'elech, the Moisef, Yosef, from this day, Chamishas above, going forward, whoever adds in learning Torah, the Eibishter will add days into his life. This is just an additional statement. This is a new guidance that the Gemara is giving. Nit al satam, and it's not being brought here as a reason for the celebration, explaining what it said before. On is bechlal madgish nitim etzem inyan. It's not coming to emphasize the very fact that you now have time to learn, as meken demot oisik zayin b'Torah, nor as from dem tog is meisif mi leilois ala yomim lasik b'Torah. The main point that it's coming to say here is that now you can add from the time at night, because the nights are getting shorter, so you can begin adding now from that time to the day to learn Torah. This is Shaykh Solomon. This is a fact regarding the fact that it's becoming shorter nights that's applicable to everyone. This has nothing to do with those that were cutting the wood and therefore didn't have time to learn. Ubefrat, as krisas eitzim is mistam, wie jeder Arbeit getan geworden nit baleilis. The cutting of the wood, probably like all work, was not done at night. Is doch benitten die done, it took an eisnam by krisas eitzim. So for the ones cutting the wood, since it wasn't done at night, so it has nothing to do with this that it says here regarding learning more Torah because the nights are getting shorter. So chalal, it's a separate hayra for everybody. So the question still remains that the Gemara does not ever point out that the stopping of the cutting of the wood is related with now having more time to learn. Is another question on Rabbeinu Gershom's pshat is nit mistaver as man soll keveh sein a yomtiv was soll reisbringen a chesaren in der mitzvah pa'ula von krisas eitzel l'maracha. It's not logical to say that we're going to establish a yomtiv. True, this day brings a benefit for learning Torah, but on the other hand, it is a day that you're stopping from doing a mitzvah, and you're lacking now that mitzvah. So the Yom Tov is being celebrated for stopping to do a mitzvah. That's not an adequate explanation that there should be a Yom Tov. Therefore, the Rashbam says that the main point here is that we completed a mitzvah, and completing a mitzvah is a reason for celebration. But even according to the Rashbam's pshat, we still need to understand. Mit dem Lashon mitzvah gedaila, when the Rashbam says that they completed to do a mitzvah gedaila, is the Rashbam bepashtos oisen tzemaz bezayin favos chamisha asabav is nit stama yomtiv. He wants to explain why is chamisha asabav not just a plain yomtiv like any other, nor as the Gemara says like hoye yomim tovim liyisrael. There's no other yomtiv for Yidden like this, Yom Kippurim, a Yom Tov Gadol Umiyuchad. There's no other Yom Tovim as great as this, and also Yom Kippur, and this is a very great and special Yom Tov. So therefore the Rashbam says, they completed a special and great mitzvah. But v'tzarech bir, the question is, Favos is krisas eitzel l'maracha a mitzvah gedola, nit stama mitzvah. Why is cutting wood for the mizbeach considered to be such a great mitzvah and not just one other mitzvah, preparing for the mitzvah of bringing karbanos? On the contrary, is God not a hechsher mitzvah. Seemingly, the cutting of the wood is not even a mitzvah. It's just preparing for a mitzvah. Umgereiten genug eitzim in the lishka for the mizbeach and akravis akarbanis of the mizbeach. It's just preparing for the next year that there should be enough wood in the chamber where they kept the wood for the maracha and for bringing the karbanis on the mizbeach. So it's only preparing for a mitzvah. Ubefrat as afile by agmar von a mitzvah mamish siyum atayre, even by the conclusion of an actual mitzvah, for example, finishing the whole Torah, gefit mir nit dem lashon as das is azman von simche gedeile vi yom tov shloi ha yom tovim kamayim. We don't find ever such an expression that it's such a great joy and such a great celebration. There's no other Yom Tovim that compared to this. So why here, by completing this only preparation for a mitzvah, is it a reason for such great celebration? Now there's an additional detail here in Siv Gimel that the Gemara said. In Divrei Rav Menashe, so then Rav Menashe says about this day, based on this reason, that v'karulei yom tavam magal, that this is the day that was referred to as the day of the breaking of the axe. So there are also two different interpretations in this. Taisus is mefarish. Taisus says all it means is shemaynim melichres eitzim l'maracha. From this day going forward, they stopped cutting the wood for the fire. Al derech zeh bepirish Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom also says mikan ve'elech ein tzrichin hamagal lichres eitzim. There was no need for the axe to cut wood anymore. So they sort of put the axe aside. That's what taver magal means. The Rashbam beteicht. However, the Rashbam says, Shenishberu hakardumais, the axes were broken. She'ein tzayrechayd behen, they have no need for them. Lachtevetzim to chop the wood. Was from pashtus l'shayna is mashma. So from the simple words of the Rashbam, it seems, as the shen taver magal meant that the words taver magal, which literally is translated as breaking the axe, means nit nor areis bringen as medarf mer nit kairis eitzim zayin mitten magal. It's not just an expression. That does not mean literally that they broke the axe, but it just means that they didn't need the axe anymore. But it actually means literally, they broke the axe, them kardem, or another word for it is the axe, kardem. On Azayzech mashma from Pirish Rashi. Same seems from what Rashi says, was is mefarish shviras hagarzen, that they broke the axe. Hechrech of them Pirish and Gemara is move on bepashtus. Why Rashi and the Rashbam learned literally that it means that they broke the axe is simply understood. Neisuf of them was the poshte taich from Tava Magal, nit bottle or the posak is shviras akeli, garzen. the simple translation of this unusual expression here, taver, that they broke the axe. It doesn't say bottle or pasak, which would just mean that it ceased or stopped. It means that they actually broke it. But besides this, Leuten Pirish, as Yom Taver Magel main blois, as Mahat mitten Magel, Oifger to Ton di Pu'uluf and Krisis Eitzim, that all Rav Menashe is saying is that they stopped using the axe to cut wood with it. Kumtais, as Rav Menashe is Meisif mit Zayin Zagen as Karele, Yom Taver Magel, Oiv Dibre, Rabbi, Rav Yosef, which also said, Yom Shepaskim Melichres Eitzim Lamarache, Nit Binyan, not as their tag is angerufen al Shem Zeh. Comes out a very funny thing. Rav Menashe is not really adding anything to what Rabbi and Rav Yosef already said. Rabbi and Rav Yosef said that this is the day that they stopped cutting the wood. What's Rav Menashe saying? Also the same thing, that it's the day that they stopped cutting wood. The only thing that he's adding is that they actually named the day with this name, the name of the stopping of the cutting of the wood. But he's not really adding anything substantial to the subject here. But according to what the Rashbam and Rashi say, he's actually adding a very, very important and interesting detail, that they actually broke the axe. That's what Rav Rashi came to be Machadish. Another reason why Rashi and Rashbam say what they say, another main point here is, in the minion from Taver Magel, als meinen, if all Taver Magel means is that they did not anymore cut wood for the fire, hat sich der Tag nicht ausgeteilt von die alle weitere Texte. So there's nothing unique about this day and all the following days that they did not cut wood anymore. Der meinen Melichres Eitzim hat sich gezeugen bis Nissen Shalachre. From Chamisha Sabav until all the following months, until the beginning of Nissen, it was all days that they held back. They did not cut wood. So what's unique about this day? That this is the day that they're not cutting wood. They're not cutting wood for any of the days following as well. The Rebbe learned the Rashbam. So therefore the Rashbam says, as das meint, nishberu hakardumais, that the axes were broken. Und das is Rav Menashe and Meisif. And this is what Rav Menashe is adding here. As nit no lehoyu kaisum eitzim lamaracha. Not only didn't they cut wood, nor taver magel. Their tag is zerbrochen geworden, their magel mit welchem hat kaides gewend die eitzim. It's on this day that they actually broke this axe, that they cut the wood with it. If so, but now here comes a very strong question on this. In was besteht der Ilui von zerbrechen die kardumais? What's the big deal, or the great thing about the fact that they broke the axes? This is something which is so special and unique that we're giving a name for this day, that they broke the axes on this day. As the Tag wird angerufen al Shem Zeh, that this is the name of the day that they are breaking the axe. Another question in general about this whole thing of breaking an axe is not understood. Why do they have to break the axe? You can just put it aside and not use it. On the contrary, this wouldn't this be an isser of baltashchis to destroy something for no purpose? Now, the fact that they did not want to use this axe for any other mundane use, to chop wood for other purposes, it could be explained, even though the Rebbe says this is a teichik. Since this axe was used for the purpose of preparing the wood for the Mizbeach, for Kodesh, so they didn't want to use the same axe for any needs that are for mundane things. So now we understand that they can't just take it and make use out of it for other things. Es ist aber nicht move on, but the question still is, what's the point though of breaking this axe? It could be left to use it for the following year, to cut wood with it next year. Okay, so that's the question over here on what Rav Menashe says. So B'chlal, we need to understand what's this mitzvah gedola about the cutting the wood, that because of this it's such a great Yom Tov when they complete this mitzvah. And what's this idea of breaking this axe, and so much so that we give this name to the day, that it's the day of the breaking of the axe? Okay, so the Rabbi here will explain what this inyan is, but first, to give us the proper context of what's going on over here, in Sif Daled, the Rabbi begins explaining B'chlal regarding the Yom Tov of Chamisha Asar B'Av, and the other reasons that the Gemara brings first about this. The so the explanation here is as follows. The Maimeh from Rab Shimon Gamliel. The statement of Rab Shimon Gamliel in the Mishnah, he's the one that says that Lehoyu Yomim Tovim LiYisrael Chamisha Asar B'Av Chol. that there were no Yom Tovim for Yidden that were as great as the 15th of Av. Kommt behemshech ukisiyum, it's following and it concludes to the Divrei Mishnah, to what it said earlier in the Mishnah, B'nigeya Tisha B'Av, regarding the day of Tisha B'Av. Was is der Yom ha'evel b'shana, which is the day of mourning in the year. Was in Meshach Hashana is Nitona Chazah Yom Heipach HaSimcha V'Yom Tov V'Datag V'Tisha B'Av. During the year, there's no other day in the year that is a day of the opposite of joy and opposite of a Yom Tov, like the day of Tisha B'Av. So a connection to this is the Mishnah Mamshech U'Mesayim Binyan Tov. So the Mishnah continues and concludes with the positive in the Kitzei Ahavchi. In the opposite extreme, Yom Tovim LiYisrael K'Chamisha B'Av V'Yom Kippurim. No greater Yom Tov for Yidden like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. So now Vapizeh is move on V'Yom Tag. So based on this, that Chamisha B'Av is the opposite extreme of the opposite of Simcha of Tisha B'Av. So as move on the Yom Tag, this explains and it gives us a geschmack understanding as oich the timing of the actual reasons that are given for the celebration of this day. They are actually things that are in contrast, and the opposite, the source of joy of these things are because they are the exact opposite of what causes the mourning for the day of Tisha B'Av. Yes, if we'll look now here, the Rebbe will go through the reasons. Most of them, you can see it very clearly how it is the exact opposite of what happened on Tisha B'Av. The Pashtus move on, it's simply understood, the Taimim, Yom Shekolo by Mesim Midbar, the day that the people stopped dying in the Midbar, which is the Bittul Hagzeire, Nitzu Arangein in Eretz Yisrael. This nullified the decree that began on Tisha B'Av not to enter into Eretz Yisrael. And finally on Chamisha B'Av, this Gzeire they realized had stopped. On Yom Shenitnu Haruge Beita L'Kvura, the day that the people that were killed by Beita were able to be buried, Vazei Zenen Benigud und der Tikkun, zu die zwei Inyanim, was beTisha B'Av Nigzar alav Esenish Le'ikonsu, und beTisha B'Av Nilkeda Beita. Oh, so the Rebbe here goes back to both reasons here. So the fact that on this day, the Gzeira of not going into Eretz Yisrael stopped. So this is in contrast to the fact that on Tisha B'Av, the Gzeira that Yidden should not enter into Eretz Yisrael took place. And also, Tisha B'Av was the day that the city of Beita was conquered and Yidden were killed. And then it was Chamisha B'Av when they were able to be buried. So that's also sort of nullifying and the opposite of the source of the mourning of the day of Tisha B'Av. The end of the time, so not to explain also regarding the other reasons that it says there in the Gemara. The erste Tam Inyan, what the Gemara brings is, so the very first reason that the Gemara brings for the celebration of Chamisha B'Asabav, Yom Shehutru Shvatim Lavi Zebezeh, the day that the Shvatim were allowed to marry into one another. Yes, I explained this in the beginning, and here the Rebbe will spend more time and focus more to explain how, in any way, is this the opposite of the cause of mourning of Tisha B'Av. So let's see. So hat sich geendigt der Abhalt von Leutisev Nachla Mimata Lamata Acher. What really ended here was that the reason the Yidden were not allowed to marry one into another is, as I mentioned, because if there's a woman from one Shevet that inherited a property from her Shevet and marries then into another Shevet, she'll be bringing over that property to then be inherited by her husband or children from a different Shevet. So therefore, by being mevatel, this isser of intermarrying, so now it becomes possible that the nachla of one shevet could actually end up by the nachla of another shevet. Was der Reif to in them is, was hotru chulu bringt an ilui umayle in the knise ves yashvus baretz. If so, if you think about this, it comes out that this heter for the shvatim to intermarry brings a maila in the entrance and the settling of Yidden in Eretz Yisrael und the farasul Yom Tov. And that's why this is a reason for it to be a day of a Yom Tov. Meaning that this day is not just a celebration for the fact that now it makes it easier for these women to get married because we take off a certain limitation, but this actually also brings an added knisa of Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. How is that? So the explanation for this is as follows. And there's 2 points to this. Kol's mans is given the isser von leisisev nach legaimer, as long as this isser is in place that they shouldn't intermarry. in order that we should be sure that the nachla of one shevet remains there and not by another. Yeah, the Chelek in Eretz Yisrael hat gemusst bleiben bei der shevet zu welcher es mlechatchilik zugeteilt geworden. The inheritance of the portion of every shevet must remain with that shevet that it was given to. So two things. First of all, b'nigeya zu dem Chelek given nit kein beile shlema. So regarding this portion that this shevet has, it can't be considered a full-fledged ownership. Hat es nicht gekannt übergeben an andere shevet. There's a certain limitation in the ownership. You can't do with it whatever you want. You can't give it over to a different shevet. So therefore, that's the first limitation there is in the ownership here. Additionally, b'nigeya shar Eretz Yisrael, regarding the entire Eretz Yisrael, in other words, the ownership and connection that any individual yid of any shevet has to the whole Eretz Yisrael, hat a klak in shaychus nit. So a yid from one shevet that has his portion has no connection to any other part of Eretz Yisrael. Afilin it and afshadis labailis. He doesn't even have the possibility to attain ownership. Ein roy labailis. It's not fit for him to become an owner of that shevet. Yed shevet gehat nor zayin chelik mesuyim. Every shevet has his portion, and it's set up in a way that you're not allowed to intermarry, and there's no possibility for you ever getting an inheritance from a different shevet. So when this Isser of intermarrying was removed, so this now brought about in both of these points that number one, now there's a full shleimus that every individual yid has in his chelik, because he could do with it whatever he wants. He has the full expression of ownership, even to choose to give it to someone else. And also, it's now possible that every yid should get an ownership on the entire Eretz Yisrael. These 2 points over here regarding the ownership of Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, the full ownership of the portion of every individual shevet, and also the possibility of ownership on the entire Eretz Yisrael, those are 2 different aspects of the connection of Yidden to Eretz Yisrael. So Yeshleimas, das ist al derech o me'ein, die zwei oifanim bebailos von Bnei Yisrael of Eretz Yisrael. This is similar to the 2 kinds of ownerships that Yidden have over Eretz Yisrael, which is Ba'if Shel Yerusha or Ba'if Shel Matana. Eretz Yisrael is both considered to be an inheritance, and it's also a gift. As the Rebbe brings the sources for this regarding the connection of Yidden as it's brought here in Hara 47. Mitzad in Yana Yerusha, so when it comes to the fact that Eretz Yisrael is an inheritance for Yidden, was Gemar Yerusha is Keshemachalken Oisa Liyarshan Legamri. What's considered to be full inheritance? When you inherit and then divide the portions, and each one can get his part. If you don't divide it, so then what do you have from the inheritance? So the inheritance is, once it's divided, is the Adgoshe Chelik Prati to Shevet Prati. Here, the main emphasis is that every individual Shevet is getting his portion for his Shevet. So over here, the Shleimos of the Bailos that's relevant is the fact that you can do with your portion whatever you want. But when it comes to the fact that Eretz Yisrael is a gift, there's Adarabah. Over there, on the contrary, over here, when the Eibishter gives, he gives with a good eye, which means Nasan Akoil, the Eibishter gives everything to all of Klal Yisrael. Und the Nisine is Bishleimusa. As far as the giver is concerned, the Eibishter gives and gives completely. And even when there is that Isra in the first generation that they're not allowed to marry into another Shevet in order that the portion of one Shevet should not go to the other, so seemingly it's impossible for one Shevet to get a portion from the entire Eretz Yisrael, is this Narvas Ar Yehuda Revi Ale. There is a lion, which is this Isra, that's an external reason that's stopping you from actually accessing this piece of land. But as far as the giver is concerned, as far as the gift, the Eibishter gives the gift completely to everyone, whether they're able to access it or not. So over here, the point is that every single Yid really is receiving this gift of the entire Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so now coming back here to the point. Let's move on. So we understand of all of this. As the Shleimus, Haknisa, Eretz Yisrael, when is there the full entry of Yidden to Eretz Yisrael? Es is da Bailos b'Shleimus, when they have the full Bailos on their portion. Und roile Bailos von jeder Yidden of ganz Eretz Yisrael. And that it should not be possible that every single Yid should get an inheritance and a portion in any part of the entire Eretz Yisrael. In actuality, not only because the Eibishter gives, but you should actually be able to access it. Is nizgale geworden, so this was made possible, and this was revealed, when hotru shvatim lavi zeh b'zeh, when the Shvatim were able to intermarry one to another. So it comes out that this reason of Hutru Shvatim Lavi Zeh B'Zeh is the contrast, and it's the opposite of Tisha B'Av, which is the time when the Gzeira was that Eden should not enter into Eretz Yisrael. Okay, now after all of this, we move on to the actual reason that the Rebbe focused on in the beginning of the Sikha regarding the fact that it's the day that they stopped cutting the wood for the fire on the Mizbeach. So here in Sifei, the Rebbe begins, so even though there were 5 different things that occurred to Yidden on Tisha B'Av, and the erste Inyan is, was Tisha B'Av nigzru ala v'seinu shloi konsularet. And the first of the 5 is that it was decreed that Yidden should not enter into Eretz Yisrael. Is aber the Iker, Gzeiras HaTainis b'Tisha B'Av, mitzad ha'chorben ha'bayis v'seir bay. But the main reason for the decree to fast on Tisha B'Av is because of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash that happened on this day. Und der Rebbe nimmt on the Gemara, so therefore the Gemara accepts as the Tam ha'ikri of lehoyam im toivim liYisrael Chamishas B'Av. What's the main reason why this day of Chamishas B'Av was such a great celebration? Is weil das is der Yom shepasku milichreis eitzim lemaracha, because it's the day that they stopped chopping the wood for the fire on the Mizbeach. An inyan was the shaykh zum binyan v'kiyum habayis. So number one, we can see very clearly that this is related to the building and the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, der heipech von chorben habayis, the opposite of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, this is considered to be the main reason. Now, in this itself, there are 2 details, because in chorben habayis and in da tzvei inyan. When it comes to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, there are 2 different aspects. Der chorben habayis, the actual destruction, as the Snidak in Beis HaMikdash, b'meila oichnit, the Seder ha'aveda shabai. The Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, and we don't have not the Beis HaMikdash and not all of the Aveda that was done in the Beis HaMikdash, primarily the Karbanis. And then Sibas HaChorban. What caused the destruction was B'Baya Sheni, was his Charmelon, von dem Chorban Rishain. What caused the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, which as it says in Shulchan Aruch, is more severe than the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, is the Sibbe Geven, Mipnei Shahaisa Bei Sinas Chinam. The reason was because of the baseless hatred that there was amongst Eden. So it's both of these reasons that if we look into this reason of Yom Shepaskum Elichreis, as the Rabbi says, on the Heipach von die Tzvei Inyanim, so what is the antidote to both of these things? Hat sich aufgetan b'Chamishas B'Av leiten Tam Yom Shepaskum Elichreis Eitzim L'Maracha. And the fact that on this day they stopped cutting the wood for the fire on the Mizbeach is the opposite of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, and also the opposite of Sinas Chinam, of the baseless hatred. How is that? So here the Rebbe will explain this with a beautiful Arichas de Gehezber, what is really the inyan of cutting the wood on the Mizbeach. And here in Sivav, the Rebbe introduces first one more question here on the Gemara. We'll understand this with first introducing another point here that we can ask in the Gemara. Why does the Gemara have to bring the proof regarding the celebration of the day because they stopped cutting the wood? The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer God loimer mechamisha seba'av ve'elech tashash kaicha shochama v'lohaya karsam meitzim l'maracha. That from this day the power of the sun, the heat of the sun is less, so they can't cut wood anymore for the fire. L'maynaf gemine benidden di dan di sibbe von dem hefsek krisis eitzim l'maracha. Why is it relevant for us to know what the reason is that you can't cut wood anymore? What difference does it make the cause? It's the day that they stopped, that they ended, or maybe the Rashbam says completed this great mitzvah of cutting wood. What is the cause that it's this date on the calendar that they stopped? How is that relevant? Ubefrat, and especially as das macht noch schwerer zu verstehen, die Sibbe von der Simche, von dem Paske Melichis Eitzim. And especially this only makes it more difficult to understand why this is a reason to celebrate. Wie bald es ist doch kein Breden in der Gewen, Kanal. This is simply just the fact that the sun, the light of the sun is less, and therefore there could be more moisture in the wood, so they had no choice and they had to stop. It's not like there was anything unique about this day. It was just technically because of nature, so they were forced to stop. So it doesn't really add anything to explaining what's unique about this day. So the explanation here is he anisenes. This itself is actually a very main point to explain why this day is such a great celebration. When they cut wood for the fire on the Mizbeach at Oifgetam. What it really accomplished was, as b'meshach kol hashana, that for the entire year, zol mekenen makriv zayin of Mizbeach alle suge karbonis, that Yidden had the possibility to bring all kinds of karbonis on the Mizbeach. Sai the karbonis yachid, whether it's a carbon that an individual brings, whether you have an obligation to bring a carbon, or you made a vow to bring a carbon, or you just want to simply donate a carbon, and side the karbanis tzibah from Klal Yisrael, or to bring the karbanis tzibah that were brought every single day, and especially on a Shabbos and a Yom Tiv, from the entire Klal Yisrael. Every single Yid has a portion in this carbon. On its tutzachayif, oich kaparis hayachid loit the suge karbanis tzibah, and the karbanis tzibah also bring a certain atonement for every Yid, depending on which carbon tzibah this is. So therefore, what do we understand? What's really the whole idea of cutting wood for the Mizbeach? What's so great about preparing the wood? In other words, this means, as the pu'ol from Krisas Eitzim, this whole activity of preparing and cutting the wood is betoichna v'inyana the mitzvah from tzedakah. The content and the whole concept of what this is a mitzvah of doing tzedakah. V'lechiz shkula keneged kol mitzvahs. So before we get into the individual tzedakah here, but b'chla, this is just another example of tzedakah, of a person giving of his time and preparing and bringing wood, donating the wood for these karbanis. So this is simply a mitzvah of tzedakah, which in its own right, tzedakah is as great as all mitzvahs. U'b'chol Talmud Yerushalmi hi nikras b'shem mitzvah stam. And in the entire Talmud Yerushalmi, as the Alter Rebbe quotes in Tanya, the mitzvah of tzedakah is referred to as a stam mitzvah, because this is the most important of all mitzvahs. And especially when this mitzvah of tzedakah is fulfilled in the greatest way. And then, so of course, this becomes not just a very great mitzvah because it's tzedakah amongst all other mitzvahs, but this is a very great way of giving tzedakah, and it becomes a very great mitzvah. And here the Rebbe will specify. So the first point over here is that this is a tzedakah, not just in relation to anyone's own personal needs, but this is tzedakah to make it possible to bring karbanis in the Beis HaMikdash. Now the gadlus from that tzedakah is, what's the greatness about this tzedakah here? Isai bekamus. Number one, it's in the quantity of what's being given here. As yivert getan mit jeder yachin und mit dem ganz Klal Yisrael. This is a mitzvah. You're providing wood, which can be used then for the karbanis of every individual, and also being used by the karbanis tzibur for all the Klal Yisrael as a whole. Und zu der Meglichen the akravis karbanis hayachid vat tzibur, and making possible for the avodah to go on in the Beis HaMikdash, all karbanis yachid and tzibur. Und sai gatos beichos. But there's also a greatness in this mitzvah of tzedakah, which is the quality of this mitzvah. And on this suk tzedakah, it's a different kind of tzedakah here. Why? If not for the fact that these families cut this wood until this day of the 15th of Av, is nachdem nita eitzim aruyim l'maracha. You're giving a tzedakah something which later on in the year it's just not available. There is no wood possible to find to be used that's fit for the fire in the Mizbeach. So this is a kind of tzedakah. It's not like a tzedakah that you're doing something, you could do it now, you could do it later, it's always available, and you're giving. You're giving something which no one has access to. It's this time of the year now that there's access, and you're making sure that we're chapping it out and giving it now. And then later, it's something that's not found, and you're providing it in advance. This move on the Asbara from Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol. And this is the point here, why the Gemara brings this braisa of Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol. It's not just simply bringing a proof for the fact that they were forced to stop to cut the wood on this day. But it's from the 15th of Av that the sun, the heat of the sun is not as strong anymore. Is nita ken eitzim ruim l'maracha. So the point is, from here forward, this is something that's not available anymore. Was damit is musbe die Peule gedeile von Krisas Eitzim was vet nishlam bis tesvav bav. So therefore, this makes the mitzvah of tzedakah a much greater mitzvah. You're providing something for all Yidden that show up later on. A Yid comes, for example, in the middle of Chodesh Kislev, and he has nothing he can do. He can try and the best he can, but it's a time of the year where it's just not available. And here there's this great mitzvah that someone thought about you in advance, months in advance, and he prepared for you here this wood for you. That's the great mitzvah. Und the Meile is euch moving. So we automatically additionally understand as the mit wird gerecht the Shleimus from Binyan HaBeis HaMikdash. By completing this mitzvah, preparing this wood, what you're really doing is you're completing the actual building of the Beis HaMikdash itself. Why? Binyan Beis HaMikdash is, what is the whole building of the Beis HaMikdash? As the Rambam says, as ol zayin bayis Lashem muchan liyos makrivim bayar karbanis. A house, not just a structure, but a house. What is the content of what this house is? Prepared, a place available to bring karbanis in it. Und das wird meglet v'nishlam dafke b'chamisha sabav, and this is made possible and is completed on this day of chamisha sabav. As demot endigt men die schneiden die eitzum l'marache. You finish cutting the wood for the Beis HaMikdash for the fire. Und durch den wird das abayis Lashem muchan liyos makrivim bayar karbanis. So it actually becomes a place that you could bring karbanis. Says da euch die eitzem for akravas karbanis bis chodesh nishan shalach reza. It makes you have now the wood till the following chodesh nisan. If you just have the structure of the Beis HaMikdash and there's no possibility to bring karbanis, you're not only lacking karbanis, there's something lacking in the very structure itself. It's an empty structure and it's meaningless. You have the wood for all the months of the year, so now it's a bayis muchan. It's the house of the Beis HaMikdash for what it has to be. That's why this is such a great mitzvah. As the Rashbam said, a mitzvah gedola greater than any other mitzvah that you would complete, and therefore it's a yom tov, it's a great yom tov for completing such a great mitzvah of tzedakah and completing the building of the Beis HaMikdash. So now, after all of this, the Rebbe continues in Siv Zayin. What did Rav Menashe add? What did Rav Menashe add when he said that it's the day that they broke the axe? And this will bring out the Maila of this day to an even greater extent. Of them is Ma'aseh Rav Menashe the Karulei Yom Tavar Magel. Rav Menashe comes and adds that they call this day the day that they broke the axe, which means as mitten hefsik krises eitzim, on this day when they stopped cutting the wood. There's actually something more and greater and deeper that was accomplished in the building of the Beis HaMikdash. It's not only the fact that now you have sort of finished the structure of the Beis HaMikdash, that it's actually a structure ready to bring karbanis, but there's even another point there. And what is that? So the Rebbe gives the following introduction. Die Mishnah sagt wegen dem Isser von Negias Barzel ba'avnei HaMizbeach. The Mishnah tells us regarding this that it's prohibited to have any piece of metal touch the stones that the Mizbeach was built from. Was the Evan vet puzzle? If it's touched by metal, so then the stone becomes puzzle of being used for the Mizbeach. You can't build a Mizbeach with stones that were chiseled or cut with any metal utensil. What's the reason? Shahabarzel nivra lekatzayom of shalodam. Metal is created to shorten a person's life. V'hamizbeach nivra laharach yom of shalodam. And the Mizbeach is created for the purpose to lengthen a person's life. And the Rebbe emphasizes over here, nivra, it's not only that a Mizbeach maybe has a certain feature that it brings long life, or that a metal has a certain feature that it could cause to shorten someone's life, but this was created to shorten, and the Mizbeach is created to lengthen a person's life. They're polar opposites, and therefore you can't allow metal to touch the stones of the Mizbeach. Das ist Rav Menashe Eisen zum Meisiv sein le Pirish Rashi v'Rashba mit an Inyu from Tavar Magel. So this is what Rav Menashe is adding, according to Rashi and the Rashbam, when he says that this is the time when they broke the axe. Shviras hagarzen shel barzel. They broke this axe, which is obviously a metal axe. The Ilui from Tezvav Ba'av, the greatness of this day of the 15th of Av. Vem pasku lichris eitzim l'maracha, when they finished cutting the wood for the fire. Bashteit consists not only nit nor in him oifton bepashtus a hechshem mitzvah, not only in simply finishing, prepare what's needed for a mitzvah, was the fact that the magel nit genutzte fatashmish chayil uneres bottle, and therefore now they don't want to use the same axe used for a purpose of preparing a mitzvah for another mundane use. So that's one point, finishing, preparing a mitzvah. Or not filling it, and it's not only the fact that it's blois, that it's only in them was betoichna, is das a mitzvah gedoyle von tzedakah und so wird durch dem abayis lashem muchal niyas makriven bar karbanes. And not only is it, as was explained before in Sivav, that this is a mitzvah of tzedakah and not stam tzedakah, but a very great tzedakah in kamos and nechos and so on. And also, this is the completion of the building of the Beis HaMikdash. So this is all what we already explained before. Nor nochmer. Here Rav Menashe adds that even more so. Es ist euch gewähnt, der Tachlis HaMechuvim from Binyan Abayis. What they did on this day is they fulfilled the whole purpose of the building of the Beis HaMikdash, HaMizbeach, VaHakravas, HaKarbanis, which is the Mizbeach and the bringing of the Karbanis. The building of the Beis HaMikdash was all for the Karbanis. Das, was the Mizbeach is Nivra, Laharech, Yamav Shel Adam. The Mizbeach is created. Its entire creation is to lengthen a person's life, Al Yedei, HaKravas, HaKarbanis, Olav, through bringing the Karbanis on it. Hat sich aufgetan und ausgedrückt in dem Tag, so that was actually accomplished and expressed on this day, Ubegemar Krisa Seitzim, when they finished cutting the wood, noch Eider, man hat gebracht die Eitzim, B'mikdash, Ala Marache, the Ala Teg business, and even before they actually used this wood, for all the following months until the month of Nisan, so already what the Mizbeach is created for is being accomplished on this day. How? In them tabernacle, by the fact that they're breaking the axe. Nishberu kardumais. What does that mean, breaking the axe? That's haste. What the point of breaking the axe is, Shoyin Demel Betez Vav Ba'av, already now on this day of the 15th of Av, is Men Payel, you accomplish Men Sebrecht Mevatel Dem Inyan Hafchi from Mizbeach Va'akravas HaKarbanis. They break and they get rid of anything that's the opposite of what the Mizbeach and Karbanis represents, which is the Barzel versus Nivra Lekatze Yamav Shaladam. This metal, which its entire existence, it's created to shorten a person's life. So by preparing the wood needed for the Mizbeach, so they completed this great mitzvah. Oh, now we have the completion of the Mizbeach and the completion of the Beis HaMikdash. How is this even expressed to a deeper extent? By actually then taking that axe that's used and breaking that very axe, which is created for the opposite, to shorten a person's life. So therefore, what the Mizbeach will accomplish later is now already expressed by breaking this axe. Und der Fahr hat mit dem Kardem Shalbarsen zerbrochen, kipshutai. And this is why they actually literally broke this metal axe. Hayes, as von Dammelton, is menet Messiah in the Krisis Eitzim Lamaracha Lumizbeach. Since from here going forward, it's not needed anymore. It's not used anymore to cut the wood for the Mizbeach. Und es bleibt in den Blois der Inyan Hafchi was Nivra lekatze Yom of Shaladam. So therefore, what is this axe now? So now all this axe is that it's created to shorten a person's life. The Ribber is min haroi as mazol das mevatlo sein zerbrechen. So what do you do with such an axe now? This axe should be broken. This axe here was only being used, and it only had a positive aspect to it as long as it was being used for the Mizbeach. So now this axe that was used for the Mizbeach, we don't want this very same axe to be in existence in the world, because this is an axe that represents the opposite of the Mizbeach, to shorten a person's life. So therefore they broke this axe. Okay, so therefore by the very breaking of the axe, it expressed what the Mizbeach is all about. So that's a deeper concept that came out on this day of Chamisha Sabav. And in Order 75, the Rebbe answers the question that this is not Bal Tashchis, because Bal Tashchis is only when you break or destroy without a purpose. But over here, there's a purpose in breaking this axe, because we don't want to have the axe of the Mizbeach, which is to express lengthening a person's life, that it should exist in the world and represent the exact opposite. So therefore it has to be broken. So the Rebbe concludes this inyan that this is connected to the continuation that the Gemara speaks about over there regarding the day of Chamisha B'Av, and this is also the other subject of Chamisha B'Av, the inyan of Achdus. As the Rebbe said before, that there's two different details regarding Chamisha B'Av, the day that the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So we understand now regarding the breaking of the axe and the completion of this mitzvah, that it's the opposite of both the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, because this is completing a great mitzvah, that is the building of the Beis HaMikdash. And we also understand how it's the opposite of the cause of the Churban, which is sinas chinam, because this whole inyan of preparing the wood is the greatest act of tzedakah and giving and sharing with others, the inyan of Avos Yisrael and Achdus, to share with another Yid. So here the Rebbe will take off on the point of the Achdus that this is connected to as the Gemara continues there. Apianal, as the Teichen von dem Yom Tov, Chamisha B'Av, is the inyan of Achdus zwischen Yidden. So now based on this, that we understand that what's the content of this day Chamisha B'Av, to express the Achdus between Yidden. That here you had families that dedicated for their time to worry about what's going to be with Yidden. They're going to come in a few months from now, and they're not going to have wood for their karbanis, and it just won't be available for them. So this is the greatest idea of Achdus. One Yid thinking about another. That Heipach Tikkun Ubittel from Sinas Chinam, the exact opposite, and to rectify and to nullify baseless hatred. was is given the Sibas Achurban, which was the cause of the whole destruction. Is move on, so we also understand, the Gemara continues, then says, was the Yomtiv, the Simchum from Chamishasa Ba'av, is Bashtanan and them. So the Yomtiv and the joy of this day also consists of this, was Benois Yerushalayim, Yoitzais, V'choylais Bekramim, that the daughters of Yerushalayim would go out and dance in the vineyards. What does dancing mean? They go and they dance together in one circle. As nicht gucken die auf die verschiedene Chilukim zwischen sie. Not looking at the fact that there's a lot of different levels and there are differences between these girls. As the Gemara there itself describes, Yafiyais, Miyuchasais, Mchuarais, beautiful or with a very good lineage, or even the ugly. And they all came together. Wie die Breise rechentois weiter, as the Breise enumerates it all. Gehen sie alle in ein Machel, they all enter into the same circle. That's what a Machel means, a circle. B'shalom achtos, which means that they're together in peace and in unison. Furthermore, the Gemara describes there. What did they dress? They were dressed with white garments, and it was borrowed garments, not to embarrass someone that didn't have of his own. And the Gemara there describes who borrowed from whom. A daughter of a king, a princess, would borrow from the daughter of the Kohen Gadol, which is a level lower than her. And Bas Kohen Gadol, mi Bas Kan, the daughter of the Kohen Gadol would borrow from the daughter of the second in command to the Kohen Gadol, and so on. And in this kind of order, everyone would borrow from someone that's on a lower level than him. Was die Anage bringt daraus noch mehr und starker, so this conduct expresses even stronger the shleimus from the shalom va'achtos, to what extent the peace and unity was between them, biz, as die was gehört, zum choshever and sog, that those girls that came from a more prominent family is sheyeles, she is going to borrow, or even more so, bet, will beg, light, or will borrow, und sich machnia und mekabel from them was belangt, so asu yesa namach v'chulu, to borrow specifically from someone that's in a lower category than her, and to lower yourself to take from someone that's lower than you. And with the same theme is the conclusion of the whole Masechta here. That in the future Hashem will make one circle for all tzaddikim, and Hashem sits between them in Gan Eden, and everyone will point to Hashem, as the pasuk continues, as the Masechta finishes. What does this mean? This will be the absolute unity and joining together of all the Klal Yisrael. And it refers to all Yidden, which are all described as tzaddikim. Tzazamen, all together. And this is explained in detail and at length in the Hadron of the Rebbe that we learned in Chelek Yates. And then to connect back to this point of Taver Magel, breaking the axe. And on that day when Mashiach comes will be the ultimate day of breaking the axe. To break the axe, which is the metal of the entire world, which is Vikitutu Charbaisam Leitim Gaimer, as the Pasuk says, that they will break the swords and turn it into plowshares, and Loyisa Goyal Goy Cherev, one nation will not raise a sword to fight with another nation. And it will be fully fulfilled what the Mizbeach does to bring only life and long life for every person, and Atam Kriyim Adam, especially and specifically regarding Yidden, which are referred to as Adam. Arichas Yamim Vishanim, long life and days in the world, in the Mizman from Tchias HaMesim, Lasad Lava, in the time period after Tchias HaMesim. Biz Kol Yisrael, including by Kol Yisrael, that is, by all Yidden, Vas Yeshlam Chelek Lo'elam Haba, that have a portion in the world to come, Shenema V'amech Kulam Tzadikim, as alle Yidden, that all Yidden together, Veln Zich Bateligen and the Machal Tzadikim, will take part in this big circle of Tzadikim, Vas Asal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lasis, that the Eibishter will form, B'mheida V'yameinu Mamish, speedily in our times.